All right, welcome back to the Male Vacancy Project podcast. I'm your host, Amadeus. Today, I want to talk about masculine archetypes that Carl Jung set up. For those of you who don't know, Carl Jung was a Swiss psychologist who theorized that all of us have these subconscious archetypes within us that guide our actions. And he theorized that there are masculine archetypes and feminine archetypes within every single one of us, male or female, man or woman. So today I want to talk about the masculine archetype specifically because in my healing journey, this helped me a lot. So I talked in the second episode that was my talk with my friend Dan in front of the guys about my experience getting out of an abusive relationship. I talked about how I lost myself in that relationship and how I suffered what I learned to call an ego death. And I aggressively pursued personal growth. I got as much information as I could get my hands on. I was reading constantly. I was listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, talking to my therapist and bouncing ideas off of her. And I was gathering as much information as I could to try to just understand what I was going through because I didn't even have the understanding of I didn't even know how to conceptualize or verbalize what I was feeling and what I was experiencing. And a key piece of this was the first thing that I picked up was this book. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, Rediscovering the Archetypes of the Mature Masculine by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. In this book, Moore and Gillette break down the masculine archetypes that Carl Jung theorized about and established, and they break down the archetypal structure that Jung established. This book and the concepts described in it helped me more than anything else did because, like I said, I didn't even understand how to conceptualize what I was experiencing. I didn't know how to talk about it because I didn't have the vocabulary to explain what I was experiencing. And this book gave me the framework and the verbiage to describe what I was feeling. They discuss the difference between the immature boy energy and the mature man energy, all of which is subconscious, all of which lives inside all of us. And what I came to understand about my experience was this. I had suffered an ego death, which is what they called it. Moore and Gillette described this as the killing off of the boy energy so that the man can grow in his place. And that's why what I felt was so devastating, because in this subconscious context, in the ego, I died. And I was effectively reborn. My therapist, who I was seeing at the time, when I brought this to her, she called it Phoenix theory, which is another way of describing basically the same phenomenon, right? From the ashes of the boy, the man is born. And so while this was without a doubt the hardest time in my life and the worst thing I've ever been through, I am deeply grateful for this experience because without this experience, I am not sure that I would have gotten to the point I'm at now. I definitely would not have gotten here as quickly as I did. It would have taken years longer if I ever did get to this point of feeling very calmly, confidently, and securely like a mature adult man. So in this book, they talk about how older civilizations had formal rituals to kill the boy energy of the young men in the tribe and usher in the mature adult manhood within these young men. They thought, Moore and Gillette thought, and I agree, that one of the reasons that we have a crisis of masculinity on our hands is that modern societies don't have these rituals anymore. I'm not going to talk too much about that today. I will do another episode later on where I go deeper into this topic of initiation ceremonies and coming of age ceremonies, because I do think that the initiatory practices served an important role in society and for men at the time. The other thing that this book showed me is the system of masculine archetypes. And this was really important because, like I said, I didn't even have the context or the understanding to conceptualize what I was experiencing and what I was searching for as I searched for what it meant to be a man. And this book gave me the framework, the concepts in this book gave me the framework through which to view masculinity. And I finally had tangible things that I could see and point to if a man was operating in his mature masculine, if he was in his boy energy, or if he was operating in his shadow form, which I'm going to explain all of that now. So really quick, I want to do a brief breakdown of the system and the framework that Jung established and that Moore and Gillette discuss in this book. So there are 4 primary mature archetypes. There's the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover, right? Where the book gets its title. So for my visual learners out there, each of these 4 archetypes has a dual triune or a triangle within another triangle. Okay, so you can think of the outer triangle as the mature structure, and then the inner triangle can be thought of as the immature structure. At the top of the outer triangle is the archetype in its fullest form. This is the fully realized mature form of the archetype. And then from the top diverges down into the 2 lower corners of the outer triangle. And these are the 2, what they call bipolar dysfunctional or shadow forms, representing the active and passive poles. Now, although these are not part of the inner triangle, which is the immature boy energy triangle, we can consider these 2 lower points to be immature, quote unquote immature, in relation to the top corner of the outer triangle, because in each of these shadow forms, they represent a psychological condition that is not fully evolved or integrated. And then within this outer triangle, we have the inner triangle. All 3 of these corners of the immature boy triangle represent a immature version of each of the mature forms of the archetype. All right, so for the king, for our first archetype, the king in his fullness is at the top of the outer triangle. And then the shadow forms are the tyrant, which is the active form of shadow, and the weakling, which is the passive form. And then in its immature forms, we have the divine child at the top of the immature boy triangle, and that diverges into the active high chair tyrant and the passive weakling prince in the bottom 2 corners of the immature triangle. The next archetype is the warrior. The warrior is in his fullness at the top of the outer mature triangle, and that diverges into the active sadist and the passive masochist. Those are the shadow forms of the warrior. And then in the immature triangle, the hero is at the top of the boy triangle, and he diverges into the grandstander bully, which is the active, and the coward, which is the passive. Our next archetype is the magician. The magician in his fullness is at the top of the outer triangle, and he diverges into the active detached manipulator and the passive denying innocent one. The inner boy triangle has the precocious child at the top and diverges into the know-it-all trickster and the dummy at the bottom of the immature triangle. And then our final archetype is the lover. The lover in his fullness is at the top of the outer mature triangle, and he diverges into the active addicted lover and the passive impotent lover. The inner boy triangle of the lover has the Oedipal child at the top and diverges into the mama's boy and the dreamer at the bottom. Now, I'm sure just based off of the names, you can start to gather an idea of what these archetypes might look like in an actual person. And if you're interested in more about these, I'll be doing episodes later on about each of the 4 archetypal structures where I'll go more in detail into each pillar, each structure. So I'll do one episode on the king and his entire structure. I'll do one episode on the warrior and his entire one on the magician, and one on the lover. Now, as I came to understand it, a man could have multiple of these archetypes guiding him at once to various degrees in different situations. And a man could move through different archetypes as he moved through life, as he experienced things, as he grew. Meaning that this structure of archetypes within each man is constantly in flux. This allowed me to view masculinity with more leniency and multiple variations as to what it actually meant to be a man, which was something that resonated with me because I never liked the idea that there was only one way to be a man and it was really rigid. And if you're not acting specifically like this, then you're a quote unquote beta or whatever other derogatory term those hypermasculine self-proclaimed quote alpha males decided to throw your way. The really cool thing, as I read, as I thought, as I observed, as I journaled about these things, and as I talked to my therapist and other people about these things, is I started to be able to recognize these archetypes in people that I knew. And once I started to recognize them in other people, I started to be able to recognize them in myself. I turned inward, I did a lot of self-reflection, and I began to recognize in myself which archetypes I was embodying. Which archetypes I was embodying that were mature, which were immature, which were in their shadow forms. And I also began to think about past experiences and reflect on how I acted in the past and look at times that I was proud of myself or think about times that I was ashamed of myself and recognize which of these archetypes were guiding me during those times when I was acting like this or like that. This period of intense self-reflection is really what gave me the structure and the foundation to grow as a man and to find myself, because I then also started to think about the type of man that I wanted to be through these lenses. I thought about which mature archetypes resonated with me. I thought about in what scenarios which archetypes might come out and might guide my actions. And then as I started to go through life with this newfound understanding of masculine archetypes, I started to practice embodying different archetypes. I started trying them on in different scenarios with different people. And I was fortunate enough to have a friend group and family who gave me the grace and the patience to explore these things and to experiment with how I wanted to show up in the world as a man. I actually remember very specifically a conversation I had with my one friend, Will, who's one of my oldest friends. And we got into a little bit of an argument, and I pushed back on him in a way that I was not used to. As a lifelong people pleaser, I was trying to figure out how to be assertive, how to stand up for myself, and trying to understand where was that line between being assertive and being just an asshole. And I remember after the fact, later on that day or the next day, thinking that I may have gone too far with him and I may have crossed that line into being kind of an asshole. And so I texted him and I apologized. And I remember that he told me that he understood that I was trying to find my voice and that he didn't take it personally and that he was more than happy to be someone that I kind of bounced these things off of and that I kind of tested the waters with, because he was really excited to see me growing. And that interaction was so important. And I'm not sure that I ever told him that. So I will thank him for it in person. But Will, I know you're listening to this. Thank you. That was a cornerstone moment for me during that time of finding myself and finding my voice. And that interaction gave me all the confidence I needed to continue to explore and to continue to move forward. And as a side note to anyone out there listening, if you are going through this yourself, where you're trying to find your voice, find those people who will give you that space and that grace to explore and to push back on, who will not be upset with you because you kind of stepped over the line a little bit, but who will give you that grace and that patience and that understanding and help guide you and help tell you, hey, this was the line and you crossed it. I'm not upset. I just want you to know where the line is. And let's try to stay on the other side of that line. But I'm really proud of you for doing this work, and let's keep moving forward. Keep using me, right? Those people are so important. And if you are someone who you see someone in your life is trying to use you as that person, if you have the space for it, if you have the capacity for it, I encourage you to lean in, because you are serving an incredibly important role for that person as they search for as they search for their voice and as they search for understanding themselves and how they want to show up in the world. It's really a beautiful thing, and you are in a unique and incredible position to help someone find themselves. So don't take that lightly if you're that person to someone. Now, through all of these experiences, I did find myself, and I did find my voice. And I grew into a version of myself that I love so much more than the me from several years ago, which is why I say, although that was the hardest time in my life, I am deeply grateful for that experience. So I hope you enjoyed this discussion on Jung's masculine archetypes. And like I said, I will be doing a group of episodes later on where I break down each archetypal structure. I'll do an entire episode on the king and his structure, an entire episode on the warrior and his structure, an entire episode on the magician, and an entire episode on the lover. And if that's something you're interested in, if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss those conversations. And I'm also going to be having a few friends on in the coming weeks to have some conversations that I'm really excited about. So two of the topics in particular that are coming up in a discussion with some friends. The first topic is going to be finding your voice and stepping into elderdom. That's going to be a great conversation with Dan, the same guy that I did that roundtable with, that fireside chat with in the second episode. And the other episode is going to be the importance of sports in developing young men and boys. That conversation is going to be with Will, who I mentioned earlier, who he and I rode crew together in high school. And that was a very formative and foundational time in both of our lives. So those are two conversations you are definitely not going to want to miss. So make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening, and make sure you share this episode with someone who you think could benefit. The entire reason I'm doing this is to lead by example and to empower men to step into their own healing process, step into their mature masculine energy. And the best way that we can spread it is by you guys spreading it, by you guys sharing it with someone who you think might enjoy it, sharing it with someone who you think might be going through one of these formative times in their life where they're finding their voice. So share this episode, and together we can encourage more healing among men, and we can help to move the world in a better direction. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Amadeus signing off.